Good evening and welcome to World Today. It's a brand new show on DD India, which we will from here on be a daily window to the world. I'm Amritpal Singh. On the show tonight, we'll tell you how the world is battling the COVID crisis, how India is battling the COVID crisis. We're dealing with the huge surge of second wave that it's going through. The Prime Minister chaired important meetings today along with chief ministers and of 11 states and union territories, which are the high burden territories which have been reporting the highest number of COVID cases recently. He also held a meeting with the oxygen manufacturers to smoothen the wrinkles in the supply of oxygen. Of late, some hospitals in some specific states like Delhi have been talking about hiccups in terms of the supply of oxygen, and how the world is dealing with how various other countries, how the EU, which has signed the biggest ever vaccine deal of procuring 1.8 billion doses of vaccines. So how all that is progressing, we'll be talking about that in the hour. And so I'm Amritpal Singh. Let's begin with the big news that we are tracking at this hour. Prime Minister Narendra Modi chairs a high-level meeting on COVID-19 situation with chief ministers of 11 states and union territories which have reported maximum number of cases recently. Calls for working together to fight the pandemic and with collective power. Also holds a meeting with leading oxygen manufacturers. The world battles COVID-19. European Union seals the world's biggest vaccine supply deal, agreeing to buy up to 1.8 billion doses of COVID-19 vaccine developed by Pfizer BioNTech. 5 million Israelis fully vaccinated 4 months after the campaign starts. Japanese Prime Minister Yoshihide Suga declares a third state of emergency in Tokyo, Osaka and Hyogo and Kyoto. U.S. Senate overwhelmingly passes a hate crimes bill to combat violence against Asian Americans in the wake of COVID-19 pandemic. The U.S. House of Representatives votes for the second time in less than a year to make the District of Columbia the 51st state, sending it to the Senate, where it faces stiff Republican opposition. Well, jailed Kremlin critic Alexei Navalny says he will start the ending his hunger strike. European parliamentarians vote on a motion to release the jailed Kremlin critic. UN human rights experts urges Moscow to let Navalny be medically evaluated abroad. So those were the headlines we were tracking at this hour, and let's now begin with the big news we're tracking in World Today. Well, India continues to battle COVID-19. In the recent past, the country has been reporting increasing number of daily new cases. In the last 24 hours, India has registered more than 3,32,000 new cases of COVID-19. 1,93,279 recoveries were recorded in the last 24 hours, taking the cumulative total of recovered patients to 1,36,48,159. With this, the recovery rate currently stands at 83.92%. India's total active caseload stands at over 24.28 lakh today. The country's present active caseload consists of 14.93% of the total positive cases. In the last 24 hours, 2,263 people have died of COVID-19. The deadly virus has claimed the lives of a total of 1,86,920 people across the country. Meanwhile, a total of 13,54,78,420 vaccination doses have been given so far, while 31,47,782 doses were given yesterday. And meanwhile, according to the ICMR, or the Indian Council of Medical Research, as many as 27,44,45,653 samples have been tested across the country so far. Out of this, 17,40,550 samples were tested yesterday. And as we said, Prime Minister Narendra Modi chaired a high-level meeting on COVID-19 situation with chief ministers of 11 states and UTs, which have reported the maximum number of cases recently, noting that the virus is affecting several states as well as Tier 2 and Tier 3 cities at once. The Prime Minister called for working together to fight the pandemic with collective power. He said the biggest basis of India's success during the first week of the pandemic was its united efforts and united strategy, and reiterated that we will have to address this challenge in the same way. The Prime Minister assured the centre's full support to all the states in this fight. He added that the Ministry of Health is also in touch with the states and is monitoring the situation closely and issuing necessary advices to the states from time to time. On oxygen supply, the Prime Minister took note of the points raised by the states. He said there is continuous effort to increase oxygen supply. All concerned departments and ministries of the government are also working together. Industrial oxygen has also been diverted to meet immediate requirements. Prime Minister Modi urged all states to work together and coordinate with one another to fulfill requirements related to medicines and oxygen. He urged the states to check hoarding and black marketing of oxygen and medicines. The Prime Minister said that every state should ensure that no oxygen tanker, whether it's meant for any state, is stopped or gets stranded. The Prime Minister urged the states to set up a high-level coordination committee to carry oxygen to different hospitals of the state. The coordination committee should ensure that as soon as there is allotment of oxygen from the centre, it can deliver oxygen as per requirement in different hospitals of the state immediately. And the Prime Minister held a meeting with leading oxygen manufacturers as well across the country via video conferencing. The Prime Minister said this time is not the time to deal with not only the time to deal with challenges, but also to provide solutions in a very short time. The Prime Minister stressed on the need to maintain good coordination between the government and the oxygen producers. The Prime Minister appreciated oxygen producers for increasing their production in the last few weeks. He acknowledged the several steps taken to increase the production of liquid oxygen. Prime Minister Modi also thanked the industry for diverting industrial oxygen to meet medical requirements in the country. To improve the situation further, Prime Minister Modi spoke about utilizing the full potential of the industry to meet the demand of oxygen in the coming days. Prime Minister Modi noted that there is a need to increase the availability of oxygen cylinders as well as upgrade the logistics and the facilities for transportation of oxygen. He urged the industry to utilize tankers meant to transport other gases for oxygen supply. The Prime Minister said, keeping in mind the requirements of states pertaining to oxygen, the government is working on effective use of railways and air force so that the tankers reach the production centre as soon as possible. Prime Minister Modi remarked that the government, the states, the industry and the transporters and all hospitals need to come together and work in unison. The better synergy and coordination, the easier it will be to be able to deal with this challenge. And let's now take a look at how the COVID-19 situation around the world is. More than 14 crore 54 lakh people worldwide have tested positive for COVID-19 so far, while over 12 crore 34 lakh people have recovered from the virus. The deadly virus has so far claimed lives of over 30 lakh 88,000 people from across the globe. The United States continues to be the worst affected country by COVID-19 pandemic, with more than 3 crore 26 lakh positive cases. Over 5 lakh 84,000 people have died of the virus in the United States alone. And the COVID-19 vaccine developed by Pfizer and BioNTech is effective at preventing symptomatic and severe diseases in people with some chronic illnesses like diabetes and heart disease. The analysis of almost 1.2 million people by Israel's largest healthcare provider will offer further hope for countries as they scramble to get shots in the citizens' arms, particularly those considered vulnerable. The Clalit Research Institute study says the vaccine was 80% effective against symptomatic infection for people with the heart of chronic kidney diseases, 86% for people with type 2 diabetes, 75% for cerebrovascular disease, and 84% for the people suffering from immunodeficiency. More than half of Israel's population has been fully inoculated since the country's world-beating vaccination drive began in late December. And some Spanish regions like Galicia and Navarre began using Johnson & Johnson's coronavirus vaccine to inoculate 70 to 79-year-olds on Thursday. Spain has already distributed the first batch of vials to regional health authorities, which are in charge of administering the injections. An initial shipment of 146,000 doses of the single-shot drug landed in Spain last week, but they were impounded in a warehouse on arrival over concerns that the vaccines cause a rare type of clotting disorder. Spanish health authorities had been waiting for updated guidance from Europe's EMA drug regulator, which announced a possible link between the shot and blood clots, but said the benefits outweighed any risks. A warning about unusual blood clots with low platelets must be added to the vaccine's labels. After a slow start, the nation's national vaccination campaign has gathered pace. So far, around 7.6% have received a full course. Nearly 21% have received at least one dose. And talking about Italy now, the patients awaited a new form of monoclonal antibody treatment at Rome's Castelli hospital to help them fight their COVID-19 symptoms. Patients are chosen for treatment within 72 hours of being diagnosed with the virus, and they have no more than light to moderate symptoms. They arrive at Castelli Hospital for an intravenous administration of the drug that's produced in a laboratory of cellular immunology and genetic engineering techniques. Local Health Authority Director Dr. Narciso Mostarda said that the monoclonal antibody treatments and this type of therapy is really important for patients who are COVID positive at home with mild or moderate symptoms. She also mentioned that it's essentially to avoid patients becoming more sick and then needing to take up a place in the COVID ward. The therapy has already been rolled out in numerous countries but is still not widely used. And Cuba on Thursday reported highest number of daily cases of the virus, reaching a record of 1,207 infected. This comes at a time when the presence of one of the variants of COVID-19 discovered in South Africa is growing. Health authorities have warned of the arrival of new strains of the virus that force local protocols to be adjusted amid the worst outbreak that Cuba has suffered since it opened its borders in November. And French Prime Minister Jean Castex on Thursday confirmed that domestic travel restrictions will be lifted on the 3rd of May and that secondary schools will reopen the same day. The French Prime Minister also said that some businesses, including bars, restaurants and cultural venues, might reopen around mid-May as the COVID-19 situation is improving. He added that France's vaccination campaign was going well, and by mid-May, 20 million people will have had the first shot. Japanese Prime Minister Yoshihide Suga declared a state of emergency in Tokyo, Osaka and 2 other prefectures on Friday in an attempt to combat a surge in coronavirus cases 3 months before the Tokyo Olympics is set to open. Under the new state of emergency, which affects a quarter of Japan's population and is set to run from April 25 to May 11, the government will require restaurants, bars and karaoke parlors serving alcohol to close and big sporting events to be held without spectators. The state of emergency will cover nearly a quarter of the population and last through the Golden Week holidays, dealing a further blow to tourism and services industry. But the latest rise in infections has stoked alarm with an explosive surge in the mutant variant and the critical shortage of medical staff and hospital beds in some areas, while Japan's vaccination drive remains sluggish. Organizers of the Tokyo's Motor Show on April 22nd cancelled the Makui event for this year in a move likely to raise more questions about the government's insistence that Tokyo Olympics will go ahead this summer. Tokyo 2020 organizers said that same day that a policeman who worked with the torch relay had tested positive for the virus in the first for the event.
It's alarming to hear it's a state of emergency. In the UK, we call it a lockdown. So it's just a different term for broadly a similar series of government measures. And in fact, the government measures in Japan are consistently more relaxed than the government measures in UK and what we are used to. So a state of emergency in Japan really means that the bars need to shut and the restaurants need to shut by 8 p.m. So it's a very different environment. And as you can see, that the numbers are significantly lower in Japan than they are for much and most of the rest of the world. So no, we're confident in the ability to take a team to the games. We're confident in the ability of the organising committee and the Tokyo and Japanese governments to provide an environment that allows our athletes to train appropriately, to live in an environment which is right and appropriate at an Olympic Games, and to compete. And as I said before, we're pretty confident Team GB will compete pretty successfully.
And let's now take a look at a video wall graphically that how the world is battling this crisis. Let's begin with what India is doing. Apart from aggressive testing and aggressive vaccination, the government is taking an overall stock of the situation, speaking specifically to the states, looking at what solutions they need. The Prime Minister today chaired a high-level meeting on COVID-19 situation with the chief ministers of 11 states and high burden states, and the UTs. The LG of Delhi was also present in that meeting. The PM basically called for working together to fight the pandemic. He said there need to be more coordination between the states and the centre, and assured the centre's full support to the states. He said there are continuous efforts on to increase the oxygen supply, as some states have reported erratic supply of oxygen. Prime Minister also said that the industrial oxygen has already been diverted to meet the immediate requirements of the states, where the pressure on the hospitals and the health infrastructure is too much, and there is a need because of the surge for increased oxygen. The Prime Minister urged the states to check hoarding and black marketing of oxygen and medicines, because that is a problem that you always face when there is shortage of any particular commodity. Every state, the Prime Minister said that every state should ensure that no oxygen tanker meant for any state is stopped. This is what the Prime Minister held in this meeting. He urged the states to set up a high-level coordination committee to carry oxygen to different hospitals of the state. And the coordination committee will ensure that as soon as the allotment of oxygen from the centre is done, it is delivered to different hospitals of the states it is meant for and whose requirements are there. The Prime Minister held the meeting with leading oxygen manufacturers as well, where he said that we need to collectively work, and we need to work really quickly to bring more oxygen to the market. Well, now looking at how the world outside India is battling the crisis, the European Union signed the world's biggest vaccine supply deal. With this deal, the EU will buy 1.8 billion doses of the Pfizer BioNTech vaccine, which will help various countries of the EU deal with its vaccination drive. In Israel, 5 million Israelis have been fully vaccinated 4 months after their campaign started. Remember, they started their campaign well in December. The Japanese Prime Minister had declared the third state of emergency in Tokyo, Osaka, and Hyogo and Kyoto. So he's declared as there is a surge in the cases in Japan. And also, I'm now joined by Dr. Sunil Kumar Raina. He's a member of the COVID Action Group. Dr. Raina, many thanks for having you once again on the show. It's a pleasure to have you on the show. Professor Raina, I would want you to put in perspective as to how the world is fighting this crisis vis-a-vis how India is fighting? Are there lessons the world could learn from India, and are there lessons India could learn from the world? Because given the second surge, the second wave, and the surge in so many, the surge in the cases of infections, there is considerable pressure on the health infrastructure as of today.
First, thanks, Amrit, for having me again on the show. And the question is really needed in the perspectives today. What we are going through at this point in time, we really need to analyze it. Now, if you look at the world, how exactly the world, different countries of the world have battled with this pandemic, there are not many differences across the world. The leading lessons or the leading pillars have been the same. So most of the countries have started from lockdown to restrictions of the travel, to identification of ways to do massive testing, or implementation of prevention strategies like, say, for example, masks, or making better workplaces through improving ventilation, or the latest edition of vaccination. These are 3 or 4 or 5 pillars on which most of the countries have fought this battle. Now, whether these countries have succeeded or not, that is something that has to be seen. If you look at the world map today, these days, now there are very few countries which can claim that they have been able to battle this in a way that they have been able to reduce the numbers to very small, significantly small. Countries like Bhutan, countries like Vietnam, for example, or countries like Taiwan, or countries like New Zealand. Australia has been an exception again. It has done very well, but it has not been able to reduce it to 0. Now, most of these countries have used the similar principles, again, those 4 or 5 pillars, some maybe at a more reasonable level than others. But if you look at their success and you want to identify what has been the basic principle behind their success, I probably identify one basic principle, and that is restrictions and lockdown. They have been able to go for a very stringent lockdown at the initial steps onwards and implement it effectively for a longer period of time. And that's why they have been able to be successful, more successful than others. Now, something similar India did, if you look at last year's story, what we did in 2020. We went for the lockdown at the very initial step when the number of cases in India was 500 only, and we went with the lockdown, enforced it very strictly, so that we had the numbers reduced to very small in the month of January and then February, so we could keep the numbers low. So probably that is one lesson that each one of us needs to learn, that we need to have those restrictions in place. As far as lessons that India can learn from this, and people can learn from India. So if you look at these countries, none of these countries is of the scale India is. India is massive in terms of its scale of population, in terms of diversity it offers, in terms of complex systems it offers, in terms of health infrastructure complexities that it does have. So it's not something that we can pick up from these countries and apply in toto to India as such. So what we can do is that we can probably pick up from these countries and apply them to individual states which are more or less mimicking these countries which have done well. For example, New Zealand has done well, and we can apply the model that New Zealand has used to a smaller state like, say, for example, Himachal Pradesh. So probably we can use these models to smaller states like small states in India, and then see how we can go forward. But the world needs to learn from India, because as I keep saying, unless and until India is successful, the world won't be successful. So India does need to put it together, and we need to be successful again. We have shown to the world that we can win this battle. We did win it last year. We again need to put in our act together and win it again, because if we don't win, the world won't win. And it's important for us to win so that the world wins. So we need to put in those place again, put those things again in place. We need to have those multi-stakeholder strategies, as Honorable PM put it rightly today. We need to have those multi-stakeholder responses wherein the government is a party, the communities are a party, individuals, families are a party, institutions, whether they are the medical institutions or non-medical institutions, like, for example, today's oxygen makers, they all have to put in together, get together and build a system which is able to fight back this pandemic. Individuals at their own level or in vicinity or isolation, the governments at their own level or in isolation won't be able to fight it. We have to be together to fight it out.
All right. Professor Raina, you say that the lockdown that we imposed the last time, it gave us dividends during the first wave. we did not see that sort of infections, and we had the foresight of, say, the United States. Under President Trump's administration, his administration basically threw caution to the winds, saying that, well, mask is not necessary, and he had to pay a political price for it as well. US till date remains number one in terms of people infected, in number of deaths. We saw how Brazil was affected and remains affected. At one point in time, we saw how Italy people were dying. The lesson, what we learned from the lockdown was, from the first lockdown, and then the unlocking, was that you cannot have all size fit all model. Basically, you'll have to go break it down, see where you have a surge. If Delhi has a number of cases, let Delhi impose a lockdown. If Nagaland does not, then let free movement happen, let economic activity happen. So, and the lockdown came with its attendant problems of the economic crisis, the movement of the migrant workers. We did learn our lessons, but even now the problem is that the surge the curve still is not coming. Look at, for example, Maharashtra, or look at Delhi. I mean, though the lockdown is only 4 days old, and the Chief Minister had promised it for 6 days, we'll have to take stock where it goes after 6 days. But is this strategy going to really work? What are the lessons what sort of wisdom in hindsight do we come with that we apply this strategy?
Amrit, I think when we think of lockdown, most of the times we think of it as an end strategy. And if you listen to experts, or if you listen to people who are in the system of understanding of lockdown, they tell you that it should not be thought of as an end strategy, which means that once your numbers reach the top, then you enforce a lockdown. Because if you are asking for a lockdown at say, for example, Delhi has 60,000 per day cases, and then Delhi thinks of instituting a lockdown now, the impact of the lockdown will be felt minimum 14 days from the institution of lockdown. So if you are at 60,000 today, so after 14 days of today, you will start seeing the impact of lockdown. Probably why experts like us, I include myself, where we made the mistake that we did not put it at the right time, in right places, that when exactly the lockdown should have been initiated, or what should be the time for initiation of lockdown. We should think of it in advance, that at this point in time, my geographical area, or the area wherein I am presently sitting, that area is seeing, say, for example, 1,000 cases. What is the number that is expected to be after 14 days from now? Is this number going to stay static, or if this number is going to escalate to such a level that I won't be able to manage it after 14 days? If I think that this number will be of such a magnitude that I won't be able to manage it after 14 days, I should put the lockdown now, when the numbers are still manageable, then I can handle those cases. But once it goes beyond a certain critical threshold, institution of lockdown does not have much of a meaning. Of course, it does leverage me, it does give me a benefit, that it helps me build capacities, it helps me to tide over the crisis, but it doesn't give me the advantages that the lockdown initially does have, if it is instituted at a level wherein the numbers are still rising, but they are less to tackle with. So probably initial action is what is needed. Initial rapid, quick action is needed in terms of lockdown. And second thing that you correctly pointed out, we need to, across the country, as you said, no shoe fits all. We need to understand, as I said, this country is complex. It doesn't look, it's not as small as the countries of the Europe. It's large in numbers and diversity. And different geographical areas of this country are seeing different waves. It is not seeing the waves of same intensity across the country. Some are showing low intensity waves. So for example, as I said, Nagaland, Sikkim, the northeast of India. Northeast of India is not seeing the infections of the same scale. But I will still want the northeast to be closed down. I would want that the northeast is closed down. Let them move within those geographical areas and don't move far off from that area. So to keep that area still green, and green for a longer period of time. So those areas which are seeing higher number of cases, they should be completely locked down, and no exit from those areas should be allowed.
Okay. All right. So a nation, the last time the lesson that we learned, Professor Raina, was that the nationwide lockdown had limited dividends. It had negatives of its own in terms of, putting unnecessary pressure on people, on resources where the surge wasn't there. So we decided to go in for a decentralized approach. Let the states decide. Within the states, make containment zones, micro containment zones. Let the district magistrates decide. Let the gully, mohallas, societies, whatever neighborhoods decide. Whoever their administrators, their municipal authorities decide if the surge is more, do we need to seal it, do we what we need to do. But this strategy is also proving to have its minuses. Say Delhi hospitals are putting up posters saying, sorry, we have 2 hours of oxygen left, please help us. They are tweeting, center, please intervene, chief minister, please intervene. The chief minister says, center, please send us. They said, we've already approved. You realize, oh, the truck is stuck somewhere in Haryana for a checking. The prime minister has to call a meeting with the chief ministers of these high burden states today. So we and say, well, we need to work together. Our collective effort will yield results. The seriousness might not set in, as you said. Probably a 14-day period, the local authorities need to decide. Now we need to go in for a lockdown or containment or whatever word we want to use, or whatever intensity of restriction they want to impose. I remember 2 weeks back, for somebody sitting like me in Delhi, we used to look at Bombay and say, Bombay is really bad. We used to talk as if it's not going to hit us in Delhi, and suddenly it hit the fan and we realized that, oh, it was worse than Bombay. Delhi was worse than Bombay. So that sort of realization does not come in when you decentralize, when you compartmentalize, when the interstate coordinations are not there. So this strategy also has negatives of its own.
Precisely the point. That's why we keep saying this. One is that one point is with regard to whether we should go for a national lockdown. That is a very important question we need to take care of. Now, what does a national level lockdown do? A national level lockdown sets in panic. If you take care of the societal demographics that India has, roughly 30 to 35% of India is in the vulnerable zone. So when the national level lockdown sets in, this panic buttons start going on, and these vulnerables start suffering. And that's something that national level leadership has always to take care of. They need to worry about this. And that's precisely why lockdown may not be a strategy at the national level. Second, and more important from the scientific point of view, a lockdown of a duration less than 5 weeks is not useful. Ideally, a lockdown should be a 5-week period. So imposing a national lockdown for 5 weeks period and seeing the dividends of that coming through may be again difficult.
So we'll have to go with this strategy, but we'll have to learn the lessons and improve coordination.
Exactly. We need to go out with this strategy, but probably the lessons that are learned are better understood, and every state needs to build its capacity to use
with the
those
situation
lessons
at
to
hand.
their advantage. But one important thing that I would like to stress here is that this year or in this fight today, we have not been able to build a social campaigning which was the ingredient or which was the essential component of our part 1 lockdown or part 1 strategy. If last year the social campaigning was massive, at this point in time, if you look at social campaigning, it is not to the same extent. We should have set in the right notes among the people, would have avoided these panic buttons going on and people flocking to oxygen, getting oxygen and storing them. So this panic would have subsided if we had mounted a very effective social campaign.
A hectic campaign on that. Professor Raina, my producer tells me I'm completely out of time, but I cannot let you go without asking this question. So I want a succinct answer to that. By when, Professor Raina, everybody wants to know, will we defeat the curve? By when will the curve go down, Professor Raina?
I think time is very important in this, and once we hit the numbers, we are hitting the numbers at around 3.5. Probably in the month of May we will be hitting the peak, and the numbers may touch around. I'm not wanting it to go to that level, but I think that it may go up to 5 lakh numbers per day, and that is something that is worrisome. But these are estimates, and this will reach by the end of May, and then we may see a downslide of it.
Professor Sunil Kumar Raina, many thanks. Appreciate your joining us and sparing your time and lending us your insights. Thank you.
Thank you.
And moving on, the U.S. Senate, with a bipartisan support on Thursday, passed a hate crimes bill to address a drastic rise in violence and discrimination against Asian Americans during the COVID-19 pandemic. The bill passed 94-1 with Missouri Senator Josh Hawley the only no vote. It must pass the House of Representatives, where the Democrats hold a clear majority.
With the rising cases of hate crimes against Asian Americans, U.S. Senate overwhelmingly passed a bill on Thursday to combat violence. The rare bipartisan support in the evenly divided chamber was 94-1, with Republican Senator Josh Hawley the only no vote.
By passing this bill, we'll send a message to the country that should be all too obvious by now. Hate crimes will not be tolerated, and federal law enforcement will do everything in its power to detect, deter, and if necessary, prosecute crimes to the full extent of the law.
And this bill tells the AAPI community, who are seen as the other, who are often asked, where are you from, really? And I've had that happen to me while wearing the uniform of this nation with her flag on my shoulder, been asked, where are you from, really? Yeah, your dad has been here since before the revolution, but where are you from? This tells the AAPI community, we see you, and we will stand with you, and we will protect you.
The bill, authored by Democratic Senator Mazi Hirono and Representative Grace Meng, who are both Asian American, designates a Justice Department employee to expedite a review of hate crimes reported to police during COVID pandemic. The bill will also direct Departments of Justice and Health and Human Services to issue guidance on raising awareness of hate crimes during the pandemic and work with agencies to establish online reporting of them. Recently, reports of violence against Asian Americans have spiked. This is witnessed since the beginning of coronavirus pandemic. Activists and police say anti-Asian sentiment was fed by comments from former President Donald Trump, blaming the pandemic on China using terms such as Kung Fu. With Bureau Inputs, the World Today Desk, DD India.
And the U.S. House of Representatives on Thursday also narrowly voted for the second time in less than a year to make the District of Columbia the 51st state, sending it to the Senate, where it faces stiff Republican opposition. By a vote of 216 to 208, the Democratic-controlled House approved the initiative with no Republican support. The population of Washington, D.C. is heavily Democratic. As a state, it likely would elect it will elect two Democratic senators, potentially altering the balance of power in the Senate, which now has 50 Democrats and 50 Republicans. The new state would be named Washington Douglas Commonwealth after George Washington, the first U.S. president, and Frederick Douglass, a former enslaved person who became the famous abolitionist. Statehood would also give Washington at least one House member. Currently, Washington, D.C. has only one member of the Congress, Eleanor Holmes Norton, a House delegate who is not allowed to vote on legislation.
Let's be clear what H.R. 51 is all about. It's about Democrats adding two new progressive U.S. senators to push a radical agenda championed by the Squad to reshape America into the socialist utopia they always talk about.
Jailed Kremlin critic Alexei Navalny says he will start attending his hunger strike. European parliamentarians on Thursday voted on a motion to seek through the Council of Europe's governing body, the Committee of Ministers, the release of jailed Kremlin critic Alexei Navalny. A total of 106 MEPs voted in favor of the recommendation, 24 against it, while 10 abstained. French MEP and author of the report on which the recommendation is based said that if Navalny dies in prison, it will be a consequence of the Russian authorities' decision in full conscience.
Congress has a choice. It can continue to exclude D.C. residents from the democratic process, forcing them to watch from the sidelines as Congress votes on federal and D.C. laws, and to treat them, in the words of Frederick Douglass, as aliens, not citizens, but subjects, end quote. Or it can live up to our nation's founding principles. Join the 54%.
Demand to free Kremlin critic Alexei Navalny erupts across Russia. European parliamentarians on April 22nd voted on a motion to seek through the Council of Europe's governing body, the Committee of Ministers, the release of jailed Kremlin critic Alexei Navalny. A total of 106 MEPs voted in favor of the recommendation, 24 voted against it, while 10 abstained.
The authorities are fully responsible. Mr. Navalny must be freed immediately. If he dies in prison, it will be as a consequence of the Russian authorities' decision in full conscience.
To me, this is not about Alexei Navalny. This case is about illegal detention everywhere, about putting opposition in prison, freedom of speech, and opposition rights. This case is about the value of rule of law everywhere. It's about our common human rights and the very legitimacy of the Court of Human Rights. Therefore, this is not a domestic matter for Russia. It is our common human values that are imprisoned.
The decision is based on a European Court of Human Rights, ECHR, ruling in the case of Navalny versus Russia. In 2018, the ECHR ruled that Russia's arrest of Alexei Navalny were politically motivated, a significant victory for the Russian political opponent. Meanwhile, Navalny ally urged him to end his hunger strike. UN human rights expert urged Moscow to let Navalny be medically evaluated abroad. They said they believed his life was in danger as he was being held in conditions that could amount to torture. The 44-year-old Navalny, who last year survived a nerve agent attack that Russian authorities denied carrying out, is thin and weak after starving himself for 3 weeks in prison, and his allies say he risked kidney failure or cardiac arrest. The confrontation over Navalny's fate is a flashpoint in Moscow's dire relations with the West. It is already aggravated by economic sanctions and diplomatic expulsions. With Bureau Inputs, World Today Desk, DD India.
And let's now see what else is making headlines across the globe in our segment, News at a Glance.
Palestinians on Thursday clashed with Israeli police amid dispute over evening gatherings at Damascus Gate after Iftar, while Israeli protesters gathered near. Meanwhile, a video on social media app purporting to show Palestinians slapping an ultra-Orthodox Jewish man on Jerusalem's light rail train has drawn protests by Israelis and calls for some right-wing politicians for tougher police action. Israeli police have fired stun grenades and sprayed foul-smelling skunk water to disperse the Palestinians, who in turn have discharged fireworks towards them. A space radar capable of capturing small objects that threaten the safety of astronauts and satellites was inaugurated on Thursday at a farm in northwestern Costa Rica. The radar installation, called Costa Rica Space Radar, can monitor objects that transit in low Earth orbit in the region of the planet near the equator. The 4 large panels that make up the radar are connected to the servers of aerospace company Leo Labs in San Francisco. Angered by slow issuance of licenses to fish inside British waters after Brexit, French trawlermen on Thursday blocked lorries carrying UK-landed fish as they arrived in Europe's largest seafood processing centre. As per post-Brexit trade deal with European Union, Britain has allowed the block's fishermen to keep fishing deep into British waters, but only once they had received a licence. Around 80 fishermen set off flares on Boulogne docks, blocked 2 trucks with a barricade of wood pallets and barrels. The French government late on Thursday urged the European Commission to take firm and determined action to ensure Britain applies the deal. Ashes covered streets and roads on the Caribbean island of St. Vincent after long dormant La Soufriere volcano emitted smoke and ash on Thursday. The 4,049 feet tall volcano erupted on 9th of April after decades of inactivity, spewing dark clouds of ash into air and prompting evacuation of thousands of people. The volcano has continued to rumble and vent ash since then, leaving scientists worried. Rescue and search operations have gained momentum in the sea north of Bali to hunt for a missing Indonesian submarine. With 53 crew on board, the situation on the submarine is reaching a critical phase due to limited supplies of oxygen aboard the 44-year-old vessel. The contact with KRI Nanggala 402 submarine was lost on Wednesday during a torpedo drill. Officials have said air supply of the submarine, which had been cleared for use and was said to be in good condition, would last only until Saturday. A United States court had sentenced a man to life plus 30 years in prison after he was convicted of setting off a pipe bomb during rush hour in New York City's busiest subway station, Times Square. 31-year-old man claimed he wanted to kill only himself and was not acting on behalf of Islamic State when he detonated his homemade bomb on December 11, 2017. No one died. 4 people were injured in the explosion that caused temporary closure of the station and the adjacent Port Authority bus terminal. World Today Desk, DD India.
And let's now take a look at stories that make news but not headlines in our segment Beyond Headlines.
A Swiss robotics company is seeing rising interest in its latest invention, a fully automated bartender that can mix dozens of drinks, even make terrible jokes. The robot has been developed in hope that it will be a hit among hotels, bars and shopping centers looking to reduce human contact during and after the coronavirus pandemic. A barista version making different coffees has also been developed. All the versions can be loaded up with conversations, so the Barney robot can make jokes about being offered a role in the latest Terminator film, for example. Francois mayor nudged back on the power and made a subtle adjustment on the wheel as he coaxed his cargo vessel through a narrow point in the Suez Canal, not the Egyptian one but a replica in the middle of a French forest. This stretch of water was built to train ship captains and maritime pilots how to navigate the Suez Canal, a skill now in the spotlight after the Ever Given cargo ship got wedged in the Egyptian waterway last month in high winds and a sandstorm. The channel is built to 1/25th scale of a section of the real Suez Canal. Trainees have to steer through scale models of massive container ships without getting stuck. Dutch people have welcomed a new member to their Special Forces team, a 4-legged robot dog named Spot. The robot was used for the first time in March in what police say will be its primary function for now, entering drugs labs before humans do. As per the authorities, Dutch were the first police force in Europe to use Spot, which has been an internet sensation since Boston Dynamics, the company that built it, first showcased it in 2016. Spot uses cameras and other sensors and is useful because of its ability to walk through doorways and clear minor obstacles. It is guided by an agent with a remote control. Scientists in Chile's parched Atacama Desert, the world's driest, have discovered the remains of a previously unknown species of dinosaur that millions of years ago lived among lush greenery in what is now a moonscape of rock and sand. A team led by Chilean geologist Carlos Arevalo unearthed the remains of Orocar lisantoni, which means Atacama bones in the Kunza language. 75 kilometers south of the desert city of Copiapó, the so-called titanosaur had a small head and long neck and tail, as well as an unusually flat back compared with others like it. Capes, flags and helmet-like hats dominated the Burberry show in what designer Riccardo Tisci described as a modern armor collection for women this winter. In a runway presentation, film models trotted in an array of outerwear adorned in a faux fur, as well as block-colored dresses with fluttering fringes and cape-like sleeves. There were also tops and skirts with flags, intarsias, or boldly colored geometric prints, boxy jackets, fringe shorts, and tapered trousers with cuffs at the ankles. Climate change and environmental pollution have made finding enough sea life to harvest more difficult for South Korean Hanyoyo, or sea women. For 6 years, Jin has dived the icy seas off the rocky shore of Jeoji Island, gathering abalone, conchies, seaweed and other marine life by hand to be sold in local markets. Jin and Wu, 35, are some of the youngest women following a centuries-old tradition of free dive fishing without oxygen that has already faced massive upheaval in the face of advances in fishing practices and altered village life in the high-tech world of modern South Korea. The vast majority of living Hanyeo are now over the age of 70. On Hang King's commemoration day this year, people only got 1 day off in Vietnam. However, many tourist resorts and entertainment spots across the country have welcomed thousands of visitors. Thousands of tourists flock to the beaches in Ha Tinh and Nha An. Ha Tinh welcomes about 2 lakh visitors during this holiday, which is why local tourism and service establishments have launched many promotions. With a coastline of more than 10 kilometers, beautiful beaches and attractive spiritual and ecotourism spots, Khao Lo Beach in Nha An province is becoming a popular tourist destination. Over the past 5 years, Sapa tourism in Vietnam has made strong progress towards sustainability through the local authorities' determination and through cooperation from the local people and investors. According to a recent survey by Vietnam's Tourism Advisory Board, Sapa is one of the most popular destinations during the April 30 and May 1st holidays as well as during the summer. Sapa is also ranked as one of the 50 most beautiful places in Asia. This not only helps significantly increase people's income but also contributes to preserving and promoting local cultural identity. This is one of the first ecotourism and community-based tourism model in Laos Khai that allows tourists to experience ethnic cultures such as cuisine, singing and folk dance. The local people have been trained on how to operate tourism businesses. 5 years after the death of musician Prince, fans gathered at its Paisley Park studio on Wednesday to remember the music pioneer. Prince Rogers Nelson, mononymously known as Prince, was an American singer-songwriter, multi-instrumentalist, record producer, dancer, actor and director. Prince died on April 21, 2016 of an accidental fentanyl overdose at the age of 57. His studio, located in the Minneapolis suburb of Chanhassen, is now a museum. Fans who did not have a ticket to enter left personal written messages for the artist. World Today Desk, DD India.
And let's now take a look at what happened on this day in history around the world.
On this day in 1616, William Shakespeare passed away at Stratford-on-Avon in England. He is widely regarded as the greatest writer in the English language and the world's preeminent dramatist. On this day in 1858, German Nobel Prize winner Max Planck was born in Kiel, Germany. He developed the quantum theory, which is a fundamental theory in physics that provides a description of the physical properties of nature at the scale of atoms and subatomic particles. On this day in 1920, Turkish Grand National Assembly was founded in Ankara. It is the sole body given the legislative prerogatives by the Turkish constitution. The assembly had its first meeting with 115 representatives. On this day in 1984, US Department of Health and Human Services Secretary Margaret Heckler announced that they have found the cause of AIDS, a retrovirus they have labeled HTLV3. She also expressed hope that a vaccine against AIDS will be produced within 2 years. On this day in 2012, Yemen's President Ali Abdullah Saleh agreed to leave power after 32 years in order to appease protesters in the country and curb violence. Saleh agreed to a transition plan that would take 30 days. On this day in 2019, second of 2 major earthquakes struck island of Samar, Philippines at a magnitude of 6.3. The second earthquake struck a day after magnitude 6.1 hit Luzon Island, killing at least 16 people. On this day in 2019, world's first malaria vaccine giving partial protection to children began in Malawi by the World Health Organization. World Today Desk, DD India.
And that's it in Word Today for today. Thank you for watching. But remember, to defeat the pandemic, the biggest weapon that we have with us is the mask. So try staying indoors, not going out unless absolutely necessary. And if you must go, remember to wear the mask. Stay safe, be safe. Thanks for watching. Namaskar.